Hello, welcome to the video on solving two-step equations. This will be a lesson on this topic, and let's take a look at our objectives here. So the first thing I want to do is define a two-step equation, and then we're going to go ahead and learn the process to solve two-step equations. But before I get going, it's very, very important for me to stress the following, okay? Before you can learn how to solve two-step equations, you already need to have mastered how to solve one-step equations. So things like the following. Okay, these are all examples of one-step equations. Say 2x equals 6, or maybe something like 1/3 y equals 15, or x minus 9 equals -11. Okay, these are all examples of one-step equations. So if you know how to solve these, and it's pretty easy for you, understand the inverse operations, then you'll be fine with two-step equations. Okay, but if you're a little bit weak on these one-step equations, I really encourage you to pause this video or just stop it all together, go back and review, and then come back to this lesson. Okay, two-step equations are pretty easy once you understand one-step equations. So what are two-step equations? Well, it's very much what the name implies. Okay, it's going to require two steps to get to solution, and these are some examples of two-step equations. So it's like the game of hopscotch. To get to the finish line, you got to take two steps, 1 and 2, for example, to get to the very end. Same thing with two-step equations. Okay, not too difficult, but notice how we're building up to having a complete mastery of solving these linear equations in algebra. Okay, we start with one step, then we're going to add in two steps, and then eventually we're going to be looking at multi-step equations. So what is the process to solve two-step equations? It's actually pretty straightforward. Okay, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to use addition or subtraction to isolate the term. And what I'm talking about there is the variable term. So let me give you an example. Here's our two-step equations. This right here, the 2x is the term. Okay, it's the variable term. And in this particular example, 1/3 y would be the term. Okay, so once we use addition or subtraction to isolate that, kind of like if we were just solving for this part of the equation, the next thing I'm going to do is actually solve the remaining basic equation. That's actually going to be a one-step equation, and we're going to use the multiplication and division inverse operation. So let me go ahead and just actually show it to you. I think this will make much more sense. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do to solve these two-step equations, first step is I'm going to use addition or subtraction to isolate the term. So our first problem, 2x minus 5 equals 7, I already said 2x is a term. So to isolate it, to get 2x by itself, I'm going to add 5 to both sides of the equation. Okay, I'm using that inverse operation concept. Okay, so it's kind of like I'm solving for 2x. So when I add down, okay, just as we talked about the format when we're solving one-step equations, I'm going to get 2x plus nothing is 2x, and that's going to be equal to, or excuse me here, first of all, we got 2x plus nothing is 2x, -5 plus 5 is 0, so that goes away. And then I get 7 plus 5, and that's going to be 12. Okay, so that was my first step. Okay, I used addition or subtraction to isolate the term. In this case, I used addition. I added 5 to both sides of the equation. Now, my second step is I want to go ahead and isolate the variable, i.e. solve the equation, okay, using an inverse operation, and it's either going to be multiplication or division. In this case, to solve for x, I have 2x equals 12. I'm going to divide, I'm using division, okay, to get x by itself, to isolate x. So dividing both sides of the equation by 2, I get x is equal to 6. All right, so this was step 1. I used addition, okay, to isolate the term, 2x. And then step 2 is I used division to solve for x. Okay, so after the first step, basically you're left with a basic one-step equation. All right, so hopefully that made sense to you. Let's take a look at another example here. So I have 1/3 y plus 2 equals -8. All right, so the first step is the following. I got to use addition or subtraction to isolate the term. So I got to get 1/3 y by itself. So I'm going to subtract 2. This time I'm going to use subtraction, okay? Subtract 2 from both sides of the equation. And notice how I'm writing it. That's exactly the way I want you to write it in your work. So I'm going to be adding down in column format. You don't have to write these arrows here. I'm just kind of doing that to kind of emphasize the point. So I got 1/3 y plus nothing is 1/3, or excuse me, 1/3 y, right? And then plus 2, or a positive 2 plus a negative 2 is going to be 0. So these cancel each other out. And that's going to be equal to -8 plus -2. Okay, remember, it's always addition. -8 plus -2, and that's going to be -10. Okay, so that's our first step. Okay, I use subtraction to isolate the term. And now I got 1/3 y equals -10. It's basically a simple one-step equation. So how do I solve for y? Okay, well, you just look at the second step. You isolate the variable using an inverse operation. You can either use multiplication or division. This time I'm going to use multiplication to solve this basic one-step equation, right? I'm going to look at this 1/3, and if you know how to solve these one-step equations, you know that all you have to do is simply flip that around, multiply both the left and right-hand sides of the equation by the reciprocal here, and you're going to get y is equal to -30. Okay, so there is your solution. Okay, that's the conclusion of step 2. So that's it. Two-step equations, very simple. Okay, first of all, you're going to use addition or subtraction to isolate that term. Okay, in this case it was 2x. In this particular equation it was 1/3 y. And then you're going to go ahead and solve the remaining basic equation. Now this should be pretty easy if you know how to solve one-step equations and you're comfortable working with positive negative numbers and you're comfortable working with fractions. Okay, if you're not, you got to go back and review, but you can do it. Definitely can do it. All right, so let's go ahead and wrap this up. So in review, a two-step equation is just a basic equation that requires 2 steps to solve. Nothing magical about that. The process, once again, is you're first going to use addition or subtraction to isolate that term, and then you're going to solve the remaining basic one-step equation. All right, so it's important that you practice this, and you know, take me up on my advice. Okay, if you're struggling a little bit, back up. Okay, take one step forward, one or two steps backwards to review if you have to, and believe me, you're going to go 10 steps forward without too much difficulty. Okay, but if you don't review, you're just going to continue to struggle, and that's not good. Okay, all right, so keep working hard. We'll see you soon.